Yeah. Recording in 3, 2, 1.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to Cassandra Lunch number 81 after a brief hiatus for the holiday season. Today, Arpan Patel, he is an software engineer here at Anant, is going to be presenting on ReDash and Cassandra. The organizers and co-organizers for this event are Rahul Singh, Arpan Patel, and myself. And we're always looking for speakers and sponsors. So if you or someone you know would like to speak or present at a webinar like this, feel free to reach out to one of us. Our emails are listed below. And we are a part of a larger community. Data Community DC is a diverse and inclusive culture. And we encourage and celebrate and support people of all races, genders, and sexual orientations, and expect respect to be given to those classes. You can find out more about Data Community DC at their blog, as well as a list of their upcoming events as well. The links are on the screen there. What we cover here is everything related to Cassandra. This includes Spark, Kafka, data stacks, just pretty much everything in the Cassandra ecosystem is fair game at this webinar. If anyone is new and would like to share who they are and what they do, although I don't see anyone new in the chat, so we'll move along. Group rules, if you have a question, please ask it. Be polite and courteous to others and share what you know. It is meant to be a discussion. Here at Anant, we deal with Cassandra on a daily basis. We are the experts in Cassandra and real-time big data platforms. And DataStax is also a partner, as well as George Washington University. And some other program sponsors are listed here as well, along with organizational sponsors. And if anyone has any meetups, hackathons, or conferences they would like to promote, you can use this up as an opportunity to do so. Just let me know. And one promotion we have is Anant is hiring for full or part-time positions at data platform operators, engineers, and architects. You can connect with us at careers.anant.us. And currently we are announcing, we're getting together our January and February topics. So stay tuned to anant.us/events for more information on those as we release the events. All of our videos are recorded and uploaded to our YouTube. We have, I think this is the 80th Cassandra Lunch or 81st Cassandra Lunch. And we started with number 10, actually recording and uploading those. So a lot of content on that playlist surrounding Cassandra. Be sure to check that out. And if you're watching or joining us on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. We are here every week, every Wednesday at 12 p.m. Eastern time. You can also join us in Zoom. And Cassandra.Link should be your #1 resource for Cassandra-related articles. These are hand-curated here at Anant. And definitely be sure to check out Cassandra.Link if you have a question about anything surrounding Cassandra. It should be your first stop. And with that, I can pass it off to our speaker today, Arpan.
Alrighty. Hey everyone, can you guys hear me?
Yeah, I can.
Alrighty, and can you guys now see my screen?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Now let me just pulling up the chat so that way I can see if anyone has any questions, but some ground rules as I speak. Oh, someone saying something. So some ground rules that I have. I don't have ground rules, I guess. So it's a community here. So if you have any questions or comments as I'm going through this, feel free to speak up. Or if you feel more comfortable, you can drop them in the chat and we can get to them at a good stopping point. But as Josh mentioned, today's topic is going to be on ReDash and Cassandra, and kind of focusing on the aspect of how we could use something open source and free. Obviously, there are managed options, but something that you could spin up on your own and do BI on tons and tons of Cassandra data if that's your calling. So one thing I do want to mention, we have covered various open source BI topics or BI tools, notebooks, query engines, so like Spark SQL or Presto. So if you are interested in those, you can find those videos on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/AnantCorp. And we have given a talk previously for Cassandra Lunch where we covered Metabase, and we covered talking with Metabase and Cassandra, but within there, we use Presto as the SQL query engine to talk and connect Metabase and Cassandra. And we'll talk about a little bit more about that once we get to the demo portion. But again, today is going to be on ReDash and Cassandra. So if you're not familiar with what ReDash is, it's an open source BI tool designed to enable essentially anyone, regardless of their technical level, to be able to do BI analysis on the available data to them. There's fast setup, so I'll get to this when we get to the demo portion. So I'll talk about some of the issues I ran into, but they provide options for deploying to AWS, DigitalOcean, GCE, Docker, but also there was one more in there. But if you are using ReDash, the nice thing about it, same thing, kind of like Metabase, it's all browser based. So everything you can do is within your browser. You can share URLs, you can work collaboratively, and you can set like group policies and management across your organization, depending on if this is the tool you're using. It's very simple to use. And so people can, at any skill level as mentioned, can pick it up and do their business analysts responsibilities. Or if you're some kind of data engineer and you need to look at and make data-driven decisions based on what's in your data, you can do that easily as well. And again, as mentioned, it's a collaborative tool, so you can share visualizations, dashboards, and also have peer review as you go without it. And the nice thing about ReDash is you can also set schedule refreshes on your data. So say you have a query set up, but you want it to refresh on some kind of time limit, right? So you want to have fresh data on a scheduled interval, and you can do that easily based on the query that you set. And we'll take a look at that once we get to the demo portion. And so with ReDash, you have a query editor, which you can take a look at right here on the GIF. And then there's also dashboards. So depending on the tool you're using or the database you're using, we'll talk about it once we get to the demo. It essentially uses that version, like that database's protocol, right? So since we're going to be using Cassandra, it'll be using CQL compliance. So there are some limitations in terms of what you can do exactly with your data when you're querying it. But if you use something like Presto, which ReDash and Metabase have access to, or if you're using something like Databricks, which ReDash also has connections with, you can then integrate joins and SQL-like queries on your NoSQL data. And with visualizations, they have a fair amount, whether they be maps, plots, graphs, and we'll take a look at that once we get to the demo portion. And then you can essentially publish them and use them in creating dashboards based on, maybe you have them separated based on the division of data that it's going to, or the table it's associated with, or the concept of what it's associated with. And so ReDash also has a REST API. So anything that you can do in the UI, you can also do with the REST API. So if you're building some other tool to give access, so you can also use the REST API, so you don't have to do everything, every single thing from the UI itself. And so they have, because it's open source, there's a fair amount of extensible like source APIs, but then you can also make your own if needed. And with ReDash, you can also set up alerts, so you can have conditions and be alerted if you see some kind of data change. So if you see something trending in the negative direction, you can set up alerts based on like your recurring intervals, and you see that data is changing, it drops below a certain threshold, so send me an alert. So coming to the demo portion, we're going to be spinning up ReDash on DigitalOcean. The reason that we picked DigitalOcean is because I was having issues trying to get it run. So originally what I was planning on doing is taking the Docker version and then spinning it up on Gitpod. But there are some dependency issues I was running into, but I didn't want to spin my wheels. So I just picked the next easiest option. And we'll talk about how DigitalOcean makes it easy to get set up with ReDash. And we'll go through that once we get to the portion or the actual demo portion. We'll also be using Scylla Cloud. And the reason we're using Scylla Cloud is, so as I was trying to set up the ReDash on Gitpod, and then I transferred over to DigitalOcean, I was running into some connection issues. So I had tried running Gitpod or running Cassandra on Gitpod as a VM, and then taking the public IP from there, connecting it. But I guess there were some firewall or networking issues. So then I tried doing it on my local, still some firewall connecting issues. So I opted to use Scylla Cloud. I also took a look at using DataStax Astra, but when using DataStax Astra, if you're familiar with DataStax Astra, if you check out any of our content on them, you know that they've converted to like a system for off packet management. So they're using they use their zip file, their secure connect bundle as they call it. And within there, so if you download it and you extract it, there's actually a config file within there, which gives you your host name, which I just plugged it and played it into DigitalOcean. But when I took the port value that the Astra provides, it said that ReDash didn't, like the Cassandra connector version they were using didn't properly support the protocol. So eventually I found my way to Scylla Cloud, and it made it easy. So they offer free trial versions. So if you're interested, check it out. You can do free trial versions. They last for 3 hours. So I spun it up before this, and we'll have some time over. So it'll automatically get destroyed after 3 hours. And it was a good opportunity for me to play around with the UI, get familiar with it. And we'll go through the process of, I've already set it up, but we'll go through the process of adding the DigitalOcean IP to the allowed access points on Scylla Cloud. And then we'll also insert some data into Scylla using their CQLSH Docker. And then we'll connect ReDash to Scylla Cloud. And then we'll write some queries, we'll create a dashboard, and then we'll also kind of discuss Metabase versus ReDash for Cassandra. Some things I've personally noticed. Maybe some people in the audience have also tried some of these open source BI tools, say that if they've seen anything that I've seen, or potentially if they have some advantages over other ones. So while we get started here, I'm actually going to start Docker because I'll need it in a minute. But what we're going to do first, but again, going to Scylla, I've already spun up a free trial cluster. So looking at it, you can see you have 3 nodes, and we have their IPs, and then we also have allowed IPs. So this is where we're going to add in our Metabase from DigitalOcean into the allowed IP so they can talk to each other. And so just going through their UI, feel free, Peter, I see you in here. If you want to have someone from Scylla come give a more detailed talk on Scylla Cloud, feel free, reach out to Josh. We can help get that set up. But some things that we'll need to do is we'll need to use the CQLSH credentials, which they provide for us. You can change them, etc. But we'll just be doing the simple route, and I'll show you guys. So going into DigitalOcean, what we're going to do is we're going to create a droplet. And so when you go into ReDash and you look at all the different options to deploy open source, they actually have something in the marketplace, which if you just search for ReDash, it'll automatically spin it up. So I'm just going to do a basic droplet. It's not going to cost us anything because this is only going to take less than an hour. And even then, like, I've been charged 5 cents over testing this demo out multiple times. So for this password, I have a saved password here. I'm just going to copy and paste it in. Let's see. Sorry, I forgot I closed the tab, but I'm just going to reopen it real quick. It's just on my second screen. And we will copy this in. Okay. Go back here. All right. And then we will go ahead and create the droplet. And it spins up pretty fast. And you'll see once it's spun up, it'll say ReDash. It'll have some more instructions. But while this is happening, what we're going to do is go ahead and load our data into Scala itself. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to the connect method and go to the CQLSH option. And we are going to use this Docker run. I don't have local CQLSH. I could spin it up because our CQLSH connecting to Astra, I'm pretty sure we should be able to use that same repo and connect to Scala Cloud, but just to be safe, I'm just going to use the Docker option. And what we're doing here, you probably cannot see it because I'm only sharing my Google Chrome. But essentially, I'm just copying this and then pasting in this password from here. Let's go paste. And then it's going to bring up CQLSH that's connected to my Scala Cloud cluster. And so what I'm going to do here is I have this raw file which creates one key space, two tables, and one table has about 1,000 records and the other table has about 20 or so records. So I'm just going to copy the raw and I'm just going to paste that into I didn't copy what I properly wanted to copy. Let's go back here. Remind me later. What is happening? All right, there we go. So I'm going to copy this. Okay, so that's going to take a minute. Sorry that there's background sound on that. So it's just inserting all of this data into Scala. And while that's happening, we are going to go here and we see our droplet is now done. And if we click on this, we see that it has some instructions that come from like the marketplace integration. So essentially all you need to do is go to your public IP and it'll be set up there. All right, so our data, actually, let me just reshare. This will probably be easier. So if you share my desktop, so if I come here, if I do a select count from spacecraft journeys, journey catalog, I should get 1,000. And then if I do a select count from spacecraft speed over time, we get about 18. So our data is inserted. We have created a demo key space and two tables. So we're done with that. And then I'm also going to go ahead and kill this just to save some resources. All right, so coming back to ReDash, so what we're going to do is click on our droplet. We're going to copy this IPv4, and we're also going to add that to our allowed IPs. So we're just going to hit add, paste it in. All right, cool. So now if we go back to here and we go ahead and just open this in a new tab, we should see ReDash pop up. And so ReDash is now running. on our DigitalOcean droplet. So I'm just going to add in some dummy credentials and then just unsubscribe and then go ahead and hit setup. Password is password. All right, let's go. All right, so close, I know. All right, so now here we're in the main ReDash dashboard. So what we're going to do here is go to create, and we're going to create a query. And when we go to that, we'll need to create a data source. So when we create a data source, we go into Skilla. And again, if you look at it, it looks pretty safe. Well, take a look at this. We see key space, host, password, port, etc. So if we actually go to the Cassandra one, it's the exact same because it's going to be using the same connector. So if we go to Skilla, and then we're just going to do my Skilla DB username is going to be, well, actually, I'll show you something that happens if you don't put in your username and password. But so our key space name is called demo. Our host is going to be, I just picked the first node IP, and then timeout, it's not necessary, and then whatever port. So if we hit create, and then we hit save and test connection, we'll see that we're getting an error saying it needs authentication. So coming back to Skilla Cloud, if we go to connect and we copy the credentials that they provide to us again, they recommend that you do change them if you're using this, obviously not in a test and demo scenario, but I'm just going to paste in the username and paste in the password. And now if we retry this, we should see success. So now if we go into queries and we create our query. So for here, we see our schemas already pop up that come from demo. If we click on them, we see our columns, and we click on them, we see our columns as well. So if we just do a select all from spacecraft speed over time, we should get back 18 rows. And we see 18 rows, and we see the columns that we selected. So for here, if we want to do something like, actually, let me go back here. Let me look at these table definitions. So journey ID, and so I'm assuming it's going to be the same. Okay, so it's ordered by reading time. Okay, or no, primary key, spacecraft name. Okay, so if I try doing where like speed is equal to whatever this value is, you'll see that it'll be an error, but then also let me do some formatting. So let me just do see speed unit is text, so speed unit equals kilometers per hour. So we see that it cannot execute the query because it might involve data filtering. So again, it's using the CQL protocol that to talk to it. So if you want to do like this kind of query, you may need to connect to Presto, or you may need to use some form of Spark in order to do the CQL like queries that we were able to do with like Metabase. And when you take that into comparison, when you take that into like when you compare Metabase and ReDash, the nice thing is you can use the query engine to make queries and do kind of join-like syntax from multiple data sources. So that's the nice thing about these open source tools is when you're doing data in a big data-driven environment, you don't only have your data in NoSQL, you also have your data in SQL. So if you have Cassandra and then you have data in Postgres, but you want to do queries on top of both of those, you have the ability to do so using tools like ReDash and Metabase. But so if we just do this basic select all from spacecraft speed over time, and we want to create a visualization. So here it makes it easy, so you can pick what kind of visualization you want. So if we do a chart, a map, cohorts, counters, et cetera, et cetera. There's a bunch you can do. So you can just have a straight table of all your data you want. And then they can make it so you can have display variables. If you have rich data or like rich text, you can have hyperlink data. So highlight links as text, and you can center, et cetera. So there's a lot of different options you could do. You can also do a grid. So if you want to change the amount of items per page, because you'll be able to paginate your data. So going back to, say, a chart, right? So we have let's do a scatter plot. Let's do X column will be, let's do reading time, since that's a date. And then we'll do Y column will be speed. And then if we group by, so here we can see that on the date of July 16, 1969, there was an aircraft with the speed of 30,000, et cetera, et cetera. So we can easily make these charts using our data that's in NoSQL format. And then we can also group by. So if you want to group them by the spacecraft name, so if you have multiple clocked times and speeds for the same spacecraft, you can then also clock them by, okay, so these blue dots are all for dataset X33. All these light blue ones are for STS 101. And so we can see the speed. So we see that over time, just like a basic data-driven decision, over the course of, obviously this data set's generated and it's not truly true, but looking at this, we can kind of infer that even though based on these, we can say over time, obviously it's not like super true, but speed is increased. But then we can also make the decision of like, okay, why are these two spacecraft clock speeds much higher than the rest of them? And then if we want to, we could potentially say, okay, let's look at the first table, which contains the spacecraft's summary, right? And so we have, quote unquote, a key that we can use because we have journey ID, right? So the journey ID would match for both the first table and the second table. So we could probably cross-reference why these two journeys for this spaceship happen at a much higher speed. Obviously, it's 0.7 kilometers per hour faster than, say, Vostok 1. But you can use this to make data-driven decisions to be like, okay, this kind of trip takes on average this much time, or it travels this fast, right? So when you're working with tons and tons and tons and tons of data, you need to be able to visualize it, see trends, and then also say you have some kind of alert set on this, right? So if you see some kind of spacecraft that's dipping below the threshold that it's usually at, you'd be like, hey, something's wrong here. But this is obviously just a use case scenario, a very a dummy one, so take it with a grain of salt, but it's kind of the idea of what you can do with your data, and you can analyze it and make data-driven decisions. You can also choose stacking. So depending on the type of chart you have, say if it's a bar chart, so if we change this from a scatter to a bar chart, and we change the columns to be, say, journey ID, or actually rather than journey ID, we'll do, we could do journey ID, and then we can do, actually, wait, where did it go? Should have spacecraft name. Why is it not making it available to me? So let's do a bar chart. Oh, it's already in the group by, so we unselect that there. We do spacecraft name, and then we'll do speed. So it's a different kind, but we see that we're only getting back one per. But if we instead do stacking, we can see that based on the two trips that it took, and we group by, say, journey ID, we can see different speeds for each trip. Obviously, it's the data set is small, so we're obviously not seeing a lot. But say if we go to a much bigger data set where it's spacecraft journey catalog. And we execute that, we'll get about 1,000 records. And then for here, we'll just do a table. And in this table, we'll say, so on the current parameters, it's set to 40 pages. Where if we want to change the amount per page, we'll say 250. So we should get about 4 pages. If we scroll down, and we do. So we'll just keep it at the basic default 25. We'll go ahead and save this. So when the visualization is saved, we can hit publish. So when this visualization is published, we can also change the name here, and we can add tags to it. So if this is for spacecrafts, right? So we have a tag so we can categorize the type of visualizations and charts we're making. So in this query, we'll do all journeys, and then we'll go ahead and hit save, and then we will go to the dashboard. So in this dashboard, we'll go ahead and hit spacecrafts. We'll hit save. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a widget. So within this widget, we can select the queries that we've published previously, like we just did, and then we can change the visualization based on, so within the same query, you can save multiple visualizations, and you can pick and choose what you want, or you can have them all. So on this, we can hit done editing, and then if we want, we can go ahead and hit publish. So you see where we have this refresh option. So we can set refreshes here, but then also on the query level, we can set refreshes schedules there as well. So for here, we can set it to hours, days, weeks, minutes, etc. So it makes it easy for you to be able to get up-to-date data as you're making your data-driven decisions based on your BI analytics. So going into alerts, here's you can set up your alerts. So based on a query, we can say, let's see, end time is greater than, say we stop all spaceships from going out to space. So we have an end date, right? So we have the very last record. So if we say the greater than, and then the reference value would be whatever, so 1983, or if we look at our data, we can see when the last one is, right? So just for example, if we say we want to set it to today. So if there's any rockets going out past today, send me an alert, because that should not be happening. So it's something that you would just need to configure your emails to alert, but to set up an alert, it's pretty simple. Again, you have your threshold, greater than, less than, equals, so you can set your conditions based on certain columns and based on your queries. Sorry, excuse me. So here you can also favorite queries, archive them if they're getting old, but then also if you need to add more data sources, you can go to the data sources. You can set up groups so that way people only have access to certain sections. And then also you can set up user management. And then for, again, alert destinations, you can just put in your emails, but then you can also set up things like PagerDuty, Slack, webhooks, emails, Google Hangouts. So it makes it pretty easy to set up, because I know a lot of people use PagerDuty, a lot of people use Slack, a lot of people can just set up a webhook real quickly and then trigger some kind of automation to send it to an email group, whether that's either not included in obviously the normal email. So if you're using something that's not available here, webhook should be perfectly fine. And with query snippets, you can create repeatable queries that you can run. And then in the settings, you can do other things, but for the most part, that's pretty much ReDash. It's very simple to set up, at least on DigitalOcean. Maybe as I'm getting ready to publish the blog for this, I'll look into why I was running into the network issues. So if I can find out other ways to spin this up using Gitpod, so it's completely free, I'll do that as well. But that covers most of the demo I wanted to talk about and show you guys. But Before I move on to discussing Metabase versus ReDash for Cassandra, I wanted to open up the floor for questions.
I was curious, as like a dashboarding tool, how you feel like it compares in like ease of use, setup, and then capabilities to something like Grafana.
So I think they're different for their use case. I think this would be more suitable for, say, your business analysts versus something like Grafana and like Prometheus. I would probably relate those more to like engineers. So based on your use case, it may depend on what you're using. With like Grafana, you would need a source for your data, right? So is it coming from something like Logstash or like the Elk stack, right? So instead of using like Kibana, you're using Grafana. So it's depending on your use case, but I think for business analysts, something like ReDash or Zeppelin or Metabase would be a better option because it would be probably easier to use. And the ability, I'm not sure if someone has more experience with Grafana than me, but I don't think you can make queries within Grafana. So that might be a limiting factor for your use case. So say like SkillaCloud, right? So they actually have monitoring built in. And so they actually have a Grafana dashboard that you can use. And this is kind of your ops, right? So you can see your metrics over time as your cluster is running, right? So I don't think something like this would necessarily fit the use case that we're using something like ReDash in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I realize after I asked the question that Grafana is more of a like monitoring tool, and ReDash seems to be on like the business intelligence side of things. The similarity being that they're kind of dashboarding tools, but that's about it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was also going to point out that, something like a Grafana and Prometheus, those are dealing with real-time streaming. And so with the BI tool, you can have these refreshes, but it's really still just a full query, right? It's not feeding from, let's say, Scylla has a CDC, right? Change data capture, which would be like a real-time event stream. So you're not really doing anything like that with the BI tool.
Yeah, great point, Peter. All right. Any other questions?
Yeah, were there any kind of metrics that you wanted to create that you couldn't using their dashboard?
Yeah, I mean, so I'll get to this when we talk about Metabase, and actually I'll feed into that conversation. So with Metabase, and from my experience so far with Metabase and ReDash, I felt like Metabase provided a little bit more capability, but you have to take into account Metabase does not offer native Cassandra connection. So I had to connect it via Presto. And what Presto does, it can talk to Cassandra and use it in a SQL-like status. So it's taking that step of connecting multiple data sources and making them available to each other as SQL. So with ReDash natively within the query builder, you can't do that. But ReDash does have capabilities with Presto where you can do the same exact thing. However, Metabase, the nice thing it does is when you create a dashboard, they auto create some of the charts for you. So if you go back and watch my previous Cassandra Lunch, upon logging in and connecting my data, I already had charts I could look at. And the drill downs aspects that Metabase provided were much better than what ReDash was doing. So I think in terms of the ability to do critical BI, I think Metabase for Cassandra might be a little bit better and easier to use. There's also a feature like where you can ask a query, right? But again, this is all under the assumption that you're using Presto between the two. Because again, I could not natively connect Metabase to Cassandra, just because there wasn't a connector for it. But with ReDash, because right when we were making that query that we wanted to query on a where clause of something that was not in the primary key, it would say you need to allow filtering, right? So it's part of CQL protocol. And so there is the ability, again, as mentioned, where you can query multiple data sources and kind of do join-like queries based on different data sources. However, I feel if you're using Presto anyway, you can do that anyway, right? But in terms of just straight up, I need to talk to my Cassandra data right away without anything else, ReDash would probably be the easiest and fastest method to do it. However, in terms of capabilities and feature, nice to have features, Metabase would take the cake there. Metabase was actually really easy to set up because all you do is you just trigger the Docker container and you run it. But in terms of limitations for ReDash, again, it's just the query. You have to comply with CQL if you're not using SQL analytics engine or query engine like Presto or Spark SQL. But again, that can kind of get mitigated if you're already using that kind of tool in your system. So you can just hook it up in another place. So yeah, I think there are some limitations, but if you have a good data model, obviously the data I'm using is not perfect, but if you know what you're doing with Cassandra, right? Any big data, you have to have a proper data model. So if you have a proper data model and you know what you're doing, you can set up your queries as needed. And you should be able to get what you want. However, doing the multi-join. So say if I wanted to connect my data from the two tables I have, right? Natively, I can't do that with CQL, right? So say I wanted to get per spacecraft, I wanted to get the summary and the speed. So for this specific spacecraft, it was doing this task, and this is how fast it was going or how long it was taking, right? So if I wanted to do that just straight up right now with ReDash, I couldn't do it because of CQL. But if I was using Presto, I can do it. And that's what I did with Metabase, right? So with the Metabase, or sorry, with the ReDash dashboards themselves, again, everything is kind of, you have to do it on your own. But with Metabases, they pre-create metrics for you and graphs for you that you can further drill down on, which is really nice to have, especially for people who aren't as technically savvy and are more in just the business. Here's the data, here's the graph, what does it tell me kind of thing, if that makes sense.
Thanks.
Anyone else have any other questions or any input they would like to have if they've worked with Metabase or ReDash or Zeppelin or any other kind of open source BI tool with Cassandra or Skilla or Yugabyte, anything that talks Cassandra, is compliant with Cassandra, feel free to speak up.
I was just going to say that this is going to make consumption of data from these databases just much easier, and it's going to open it up for a lot of people. Right now, again, a lot of people see these databases as like firewalled off. They can't access them. They have to ask, please, Mother May I have for data. And this should really help, those kind of data analyst folks to just get access to the data more directly and just get a lot more value out of it. So I really thank you for showing off this tool. This is great.
Yeah, no problem. And to add to that, yeah, like it's tools like Snowflake, right? Where they do similar things. You do analytics on your data and you can build data-driven decisions that way, or you're doing some kind of data analysis, right? So a tool like Snowflake, I think, would require a little bit more like technical experience to know what you're doing with it. But tools like this make it really easy for business analysts to write their own queries, because a lot of times, a lot of business analysts A lot of friends of mine that went through college, they have SQL or SQL knowledge, right? Because they work in Excel, and Excel you can use SQL, and they have to do these kinds of queries to visualize their data. And so just adding a tool, and it's open source, right? So unless you're hosting it like I am on DigitalOcean, there's a charge, but it's what I spent 5 cents so far for a couple hours of work, right? And so it's depending on your use case, depending on your organization, depending on your data, some tools might be better than the others, right? So maybe you already have something like Tableau, right? So if you're already paying a license fee for Tableau, why use something like ReDash? Does it make sense? Is it more powerful? Or is a tool like Metabase? Does your like you have to take stuff like the technical debt into account, right? So how long would it take for you to train your teams, train your business analysts to get trained on the new tool? Is it really saving you money? Do you get the same out of it that you get out of a tool like Tableau? So there's tons of factors to play that play into what tools you use, and the tool is not always right for you and your organization. So always take that into account. But also you want to take into account you don't need to reinvent the wheel, right? So there's a bunch of tools out there like we talked about. So like ReDash is one of them. It specifically can talk to Cassandra straight up, right? Unlike me, if you have your networking correct. But if you use something like Metabase, right, as mentioned, it doesn't have native Cassandra connections. So with something like that, you have to invest in Presto, also open source, but it's just another thing for people to learn, get used to for your engineers. So you just have to evaluate your technical debt across the board, right? Does it make sense for your company to switch to a new tool? And in the long run, will it actually be cheaper? Will it be more expensive? So a lot of things to take into account, but we just want to provide the community with different options, see if it's right for them. And we welcome anyone that's maybe worked with any open source BI tools, or maybe any like Tableau and Cassandra, or Tableau and Spark that talk to Cassandra, or any other things that they want to talk about, have their experiences, and just teach the community. So we welcome that. If you are interested, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can drop a comment, or you can email Josh at josh.barnes@anant.us, or myself, Arpan Patel, ARPAN, at anant.us. And with that, I will pass it back over to Josh.
All right, thank you, Arvin. That was a great discussion, and yeah, ReDash does seem like a great tool for especially like those use cases in which you were saying, maybe the less technical business analysts who do know CQL or SQL, depending on whatever database they're connecting it to. As long as they know how to query, it does seem to make it fairly easy to create a good visual representation of their data. So that's pretty cool. With that, we can end it a few minutes early. Thank you everyone for joining. Thank Peter for some of the insights and answers to the questions that were asked. Always appreciate your presence here, and hope everyone has a good rest of your Wednesday.